A plume of blue-black smoke coils from the forge's chimney, drifting into the cracked dawn light. The embers beneath the iron distillation flask hiss and shift, molten rivulets of tin slipping free like molten tears against cold steel. In that half-lit workshop, Mater Rosina stands unwavering, her posture poised, deliberate, every breath a testament to both hope and fear. Leather gloves dyed olive and saffron embrace her hands. Verdigris stains the cuff where copper once glowed like morning sun. The air is heavy with scent, crushed cinnabar and bruised almonds mingling in equal measure, promising transmutation and healing alike. Around her, rows of shelves groan beneath glass and ceramic jars. Nightshade berries bled black by autumn moonlight, dove's bones picked clean, dried morel clusters folded into paper like secrets. Quills dipped in crimson dragon's blood ink rest beside a mortar scarred by generations of grinding roots and prayers. Each item is both instrument and incantation, brimming with the weight of peasant pleas and noble despair. She reaches for a vial of aqua vitae, distilled spirit infused with hyssop, lavender and something wilder, something whispered by the woods, and places it gently into a copper cradle over the dancing flame. The liquid swirls, catching in hues of moonlight and dawn. Rosina murmurs a prayer in Latin, her Tuscan accents softening each syllable. Respira vita, breathe, life. Her mind drifts. She sees again the fevered lord, blackened cough choking him as winter's breath turned his breath to frost. She remembers her hands now strong, then trembling, placing warm cups of broth, spiced with elderflower and crushed garlic, to his parched lips. The moment his chest unclenched. The moment his voice returned like a bell uncloaked from echo. A flicker of memory softens her jaw, but purpose tightens her spine. Today she cannot merely heal axes of plague and despair, she must heal trust. The flask begins to bob, each tremor echoing the beating of her own heart. From beyond the workshop's shutter, the courtyard bell tolls once, twice, faintly, calling others to witness, to hope, to judge. It is not a melody, but a summons heavy as stone. She secures the vial into its carved wooden box, the brass latch clicking with finality. Her fingers pause on the hinge, feeling its weight not just in metal but in consequence. Beyond the door lies not safety, but the gaze of beseeching souls and wary eyes. Outside, dawn slices through mist. A stable boy presses his nose to the glass, breath clouding the pane. Cloaked figures gather, peasants stooped like old sheep, their hands rough with toil. Noble women veiled in embroidered wool, their eyes cold with expectation. Scribes and scholars clutching parchment and pen, each hoping Rosina's potion will confirm or deny their allegiances. She steps onto the cobbled stone, earth clinging to her hem, and heads toward the wooden table set at the courtyard center. A linen cloth drapes over its top, stained with sweat and soot. Upon it lie her instruments, a cracked mortar faintly scented of wormwood, a slender bone lancet, and the vial itself, moonlight trapped in glass. A hush falls, not reverence but suspended breath. They all watch as she lifts the vial, tilting it so light fractures on its rim. A prism, secret and sharp, shines across the courtyard, dancing in the hopeful eyes gazing upward. The boy steps forward, his mother's hand a tightened fist at his back. His skin is pale as driftwood, his cough rattles like a loose hinge. He looks at Rosina and she meets him halfway. Silent, steady, bending toward his fear. She retrieves a slender pipette carved from elder reed, its tip polished smooth by years of fluid transitions. She draws 3 golden drops of aqua vitae, holds them up to the light and breathes, "Acta me." It is done. The boy closes his eyes. She presses the pipette beneath his tongue. He flinches. Then nothing. They wait. Seconds chiseled into centuries. His chest moves once, twice. Breath returns. A shudder of hope. The crowd exhales as one. The mother sobs, a sound split between release and disbelief. Noble women pivot from skepticism to wonder. A scribe scribbles fiercely, though the words fail him. Rosina stands unmoved, her face calm but her breath loud in her chest. A steward shuffles forward. Clad in midnight velvet, ringed hands folded. Not praise but calculation in his gaze. He inclines his head once, an acknowledgement, not acceptance. His gaze flicks to the vial. It is empty. She keeps her eyes lowered. She returns to her sanctuary, the forge's hearth, trail of smoke curling after her like a halo. Inside the flask stands spent, flame whimpering. She lights a taper, its flame low and trembling. She opens her ledger, parchment crisp, ink black as sin, and writes, 3 drops. Breath restored. No convulsion. No mortality. Her quill hovers. She does not write the boy's name. He is not yet history. Footsteps echo, the sound of pages turning, of lives altered. Rosina seals her ledger with wax stamped by her ring. The flame gutters, surrenders to shadow. She leans her palm against the wall, a hand pressing life into stone and memory. She remembers her daughter's soft laugh, gone with last year's fever. She remembers promises made beneath a yew tree, I will carry on. Beyond the window, dawn breaks fully. The courtyard empties but footsteps linger. The torch of the steward flickers, as though unsure whether to follow or retreat. Rosina closes her eyes, listening to the silence that remains, the silence of question, of power's shifting balance. She whispers, not aloud but inwardly, trust is alchemy too, and today it was forced to change. And somewhere in the abbey's stone heart, another candle burns low. Another hand prepares to grind another root. Another page waits to be turned. Because in this age, where medicine teeters on the edge of magic, and every cure is both hope and challenge, the alchemist's true work is never complete. The wind rises through the cloister arch like a secret exhaled from old stone. Dust swirls across the cold flagstones, catching in the folds of a novice's habit. Beneath a tarnished iron bell, two monks speak in hushed Latin, but their eyes drift to the door of the apothecarium, where no vows have weight. There, behind the wooden lintel carved with alchemical sigils, light flickers blue and gold against the stained walls, light not from flame but from reaction. Within the chamber, a hush deeper than prayer. Brother Alaric stands before the crucible, hands ink-stained, eyes rimmed with sleepless rings. His breath hangs in the chill, touched by fumes that rise from simmering mercury and rose resin. He murmurs not prayers but equations, a litany of reaction and release. To some he is scholar. To others, sorcerer. But he calls himself simply servant of balance. Above his head, copper instruments dangle like sun-caught spiders. Alembics, retorts, coils cooled with snowmelt. Their hisses echo softly, a choir of pressure and intent. On the table beside him, a sealed scroll lies unfurled. A letter, stamped with the wax seal of Queen Johanna of Naples. It requests, not demands, his presence. It speaks of a cousin seized by paralysis, of palace physicians who have offered only leeches and vinegar. Send us what your mind and fire can offer, the letter ends. Not what your books prescribe. Alaric reads it again. Not for information. For weight. He brushes flecks of gold leaf from his sleeve and turns to a locked coffer. Within, a reliquary of his true art, powdered unicorn horn, really ground oyster shell, desiccated toad liver, a knot of herbs braided with iron wire, and a thin ampoule glowing faintly violet in the light. He does not believe in magic. But he knows the cost of disbelief in a world built on fear. Years ago they came for his mentor. A woman too wise for their liking, who turned fevers aside with crushed bark and whispered Greek. They tied her to a cart. He watched. And so he stays in shadows, mixing silence into everything he brews. A knock disturbs the steam. The novice, breathless, bowing. A merchant from Genoa waits at the gate. His son, burning with fever. The monks have sent word to you. Alaric wipes his hands on a strip of linen and nods once. He does not hurry. Alchemy is never rushed. It unfolds as the stars do, in cycles and quiet threats. He prepares a tincture, basil soaked in rose water, bark ground with camphor, ash from burned bay leaves. To the final mixture he adds 1 drop of the violet solution, barely enough to color the liquid, but more than enough to bend the rules of air and body. He leaves the chamber without cloak or ring, unnoticed by most, but not all. A boy watches from the tower stairs, eyes wide, mouth slack with awe. Not from what Alaric does, but from how he moves, like a man carrying glass inside his chest. The merchant waits beside a cart. His son groans in fevered dreams. Alaric kneels, lifts the boy's chin, examines his tongue, his nails. He says little. Instead, he pours 5 drops of the tincture between cracked lips. Then waits. 1 breath. 2. A long pause. Then the boy exhales. A sound like wind through pine. The tremor in his hand stills. The merchant's eyes film with salt. He reaches into his purse, but Alaric raises one hand. Give me your silence. That is enough. The man nods. By sundown the news has grown larger than the event. The boy has risen from death. The tincture glowed with holy fire. Alaric spoke in tongues. None of it true. None of it useful. But all of it dangerous. Back in his chamber he writes in his private journal, not in Latin but in Occitan. A language nearly forgotten, useful for hiding truths. Tonight the tincture held. But something shifted in the fire. The mercury danced too early. Must recalculate the breath phase. Then he draws a symbol in the margin, a serpent curled around a broken hourglass. He sits at the edge of his cot, watching the flask cool, the shadows stretch. From the far cloister, he hears the monks chanting vespers. Outside, the merchant's cart creaks away, down toward the town square where firewood is stacked for winter, or for trials. Because for every life saved, a rumor grows. For every remedy, a question follows. If he heals what others cannot, what else might he command? He does not sleep. He listens. To the hiss of glass. To the creak of old wood. To the heartbeat of a world always one breath from suspicion. In the morning a second letter arrives. This time from a bishop. And this time it does not request. It commands. The castle walls rise like fossilized waves above the moors, their stones soaked with the silence of centuries. Beneath one crooked spire, a rusted weather vane groans in the wind. Once a falcon, now half-worn, its beak twisted toward the east. It is winter, and even the snow hesitates to fall here, clinging to the clouds like secrets. In the high chamber where the fire never quite reaches the corners, Lord Emmerich coughs blood into a cloth striped with gold embroidery. His lips are pale, his eyes narrowed, not with fear but with calculation. He knows he is dying. What troubles him more is what will die with him. His line, his name, his control. He beckons his steward closer, voice like cracked parchment. Send for the woman, he rasps. Not the priest, the other one, the one they fear. Below, in the servants' quarters, whispers have already spread. She has been summoned. Her name is Velida. An alchemist, though many call her witch. She rides alone through the fog, wrapped in fur that smells of juniper and goat fat. Her satchels clink with copper tools, glass vials, and herbs wound in wool thread. The guards do not question her. They step back, hands at their hilts, eyes lowered. She is not noble, but she carries herself like one who has dined with death and spoken softly to it. In the great hall, the fire gutters as she enters. The tapestries shift in the draught, their threads woven with boar hunts and battles, now half-eaten by moths. A boy peeks from behind a column. A nursemaid grabs his wrist and pulls him away. Lord Emmerich lies propped against silk pillows that stink faintly of mold. He watches her approach, and for a moment, something like fear flickers in his stare. Not of her, but of what she represents. Truth unshrouded by rights or inheritance. Power unmoved by titles. You come late, he says. I come when needed, she replies. She lays out her instruments on a table scarred by generations of feast knives. A shallow brass bowl. A handful of dried rhubarb root. A flask stoppered with wax and twine. She lights a small flame beneath a coiled still and begins her work. As the tincture warms, she examines his eyes, his tongue, the black crescents beneath his fingernails. It's not poison, she says almost to herself. It's the lungs, the damp, and guilt. He chuckles. So even air has turned against me. No, she says quietly. Just time. In the hallway beyond, servants press ears to doors. They want miracles, or vengeance. She applies a poultice to his chest, thick with mustard and vinegar. She drips mullein oil onto his ribs and murmurs something in Breton, words not taught by monks but passed through grandmother's lips. She knows the line between medicine and myth is thin. She walks it without apology. Hours pass. The snow begins to fall at last, soft, soundless, forgiving. The Lord sleeps. His breath deepens. His hands, once curled like a dying spider, begin to unclench. But Velida does not leave. Instead, she opens her ledger. On its vellum pages are years of recipes, recorded in 3 languages: Latin, Galician, and the strange runes she invented herself. She adds a line. Adjust the proportion of you. Notes the way the fever receded with mullein and not with whorehound. She is not here for the Lord. She is here for the learning. When Emmerich wakes hours later, his first words are not of thanks. What do you want? He asks. She looks at him, her eyes like river stones. Access, she replies. Your scriptorium. Your royal physic texts. Your Arab manuscripts. The ones sealed from common view. He nods. Done. And so the trade is made. Not coin, not favor, but knowledge. Forbidden knowledge, wrapped in velvet and buried beneath prayers. In the weeks that follow, she reads by candlelight in the cloister tower, scrolls penned in Damascus, herbs catalogued by Persian healers, diagrams drawn in ink mixed with fig resin. She copies, translates, adapts. Sometimes she laughs aloud. Other times she weeps, though no one knows why. The steward grows uneasy. You said she'd stay a week, he reminds the Lord. Emmerich only sighs. She brought me back from the edge. Let her cross a few of her own. But not all are so forgiving. In the village below, a child dies of fever. The priest blames her presence. The blacksmith's wife calls her a blight. Stones begin to appear at the foot of the castle's gate. One day, a dead raven is nailed to the stable door. A warning. Or an omen. Valida says nothing. She watches. She waits. Because she knows something they do not. This kingdom is dying. Not in battle or famine but in thought. In rigidity. In forgetting. Before she leaves, she gifts Lord Emmerich a simple vial. It contains nothing more than oil of thyme and rosemary steeped in vinegar. But the scent sharpens the senses. For clarity, she says. When they come for you. And they will. He places it beneath his pillow. And she rides off at dawn. Alone as always. But as she crosses the bridge, a girl runs after her. Barefoot, red-cheeked, holding out a scrap of parchment. Take me with you, the child pleads. I want to know what you know. Valida does not speak. But she takes the girl's hand and lifts her onto the saddle. Because knowledge, like fire, must be passed, hand to trembling hand, before it's extinguished. The Moors swallow them whole. And the snow, falling still, hides their tracks. A single candle guttered in the stone recess, its flame dancing like a soul on trial. Around it the shadows gathered, not in threat but in reverence. In this sanctum of silence, beneath groined arches blackened by centuries of incense, sat Brother Idrin. His robes, once the white of the Benedictines, were stained with ink and ash. His fingers bore the calluses not of a mason or a priest, but of a man who handled fire and parchment in equal measure. The scriptoria had long since gone quiet. The monks had fled when the sickness crept beneath the cloister walls, coughing blood and prayers. Only Idrin remained, not out of bravery but obsession. The book lay before him. Bound in goatskin, clasped in tarnished brass, it was no ordinary codex. Its title was written in Arabic, its margins annotated in Greek, its spine reinforced with strips of willow bark. A gift, once, from a Moorish physician captured in the last war. Hidden. Forbidden. Precious. He opened the book as if opening a wound. Inside, the secrets of distillation, of mercury binding, of metals transmuted by celestial alignments. He traced diagrams of furnaces and alembics, of the four humors bending to vapor and salt. This was not mere magic. It was medicine and more. It was the architecture of God laid bare not through prayer, but through fire, through effort, through pain. A droplet hissed in the brazier beside him. He had been boiling ash and copper in wine for hours, hoping for tincture or clarity or proof. The smell was sour, sharp, holy. Like resurrection. He was not supposed to have this book. Not as a monk. Not as a Christian. But truth, he believed, was not owned by the church. It was revealed to those who dared listen beyond the veil. Idrin dipped a reed into ink, the nib trembling. On a scrap of vellum he wrote, "The body is earth. The soul is air. The cure must touch both." He looked to the sky beyond the high window. A cold star blinked through the glass, like an eye half closed in judgment. His breath fogged in the chamber. He remembered the boy. 2 days before, a mother had come, wrapped in sackcloth, her face hollowed by grief and wind. Her child, she said, had swallowed frost. Not food, not water, frost. His lungs had stopped, his skin gone blue. She had tried prayers. Then saints. Then coin. None had answered. Idrin had taken the boy in, though the other monks forbade it. He crushed mustard seed, burned myrrh, warmed milk with pepper and thyme. He had held the child's hand while steam filled the chamber, and whispered the old psalms into his ear. When the boy coughed, a single drop of blood fell from his nose onto the monk's palm. It looked like wax from the candle now flickering near the book's edge. The boy had survived. But Idrin had changed. He no longer believed in miracles as gifts. He believed in them as works. The pages turned beneath his hand, and he came to an illustration. A heart drawn in precise lines encircled by flames and thorns. Above it, a single word in Latin, veritas, truth. It was this that the church feared most. Not heresy, but clarity. He stood then, slowly, joints cracking like old timber. He moved to the table where the alembic waited, its glass belly full of amber liquid. He lifted the stopper and poured the distillate into a shallow bowl carved with zodiac signs. He stirred it with a sprig of lavender, then tasted it. The bitterness clawed at his tongue. But beneath it, sweetness. Possibility. Behind him, the chapel door groaned open. He did not turn. "I told you not to come back," he said. A figure stepped into the candlelight. It was Prior Mernan, robes immaculate, eyes narrow. "You swore an oath," the prior said. "I still keep it," Idrin replied, voice calm. "But the world is no longer bound by the rules we wrote in peace. The council will come," the prior warned. "They'll see what you've done. You've read the pagan texts. You've burned herbs forbidden by canon. And yet," Idrin said, "a child lives." The silence stretched like stretched skin. Then the prior asked, softer, "Will it cure them? The villagers?" Idrin did not lie. "I don't know." But he held up the bowl, and the amber liquid caught the candle's light like a sun cradled in glass. "I know it's more than nothing." The prior said nothing more. He turned and left. Idrin waited until the door shut again, then poured the liquid into small glass vials, sealing them with beeswax and linen thread. One he tucked into the folds of his robe. The others he wrapped in parchment and placed in a wooden box. Tomorrow he would go to the village. He would offer not absolution but aid. Not miracles but method. He closed the book. He kissed its spine. Then he placed it in a hollow carved beneath the altar, where the relics of saints once lay. Because if truth was sacred, it needed to be hidden, until the world was ready. And as the candle burned low and the snow whispered against the stained glass panes, Brother Idrin whispered too, not a prayer but a promise. Not all heresy is sin. Some is salvation. And somewhere beyond the cloister, a bell tolled once, soft, uncertain, as if asking a question. The answer would come in fire or in healing. But it would come. The storm had passed but the sky still wept. Rainwater dripped from the stone gargoyles of the chapel, carving rivulets through soot and time. Beneath them, soaked to the bone, a crowd had gathered in uneasy silence. Their breath hung in the air, visible, shallow, impatient. At the center of the circle stood the alchemist. Her name was Tova, daughter of a woodcutter and a woman who spoke to bees. Her robes were neither clerical nor noble, but made of rough-dyed wool darkened by fire and tincture spills. Her hair, bound in a single braid, reached past her waist like a rope once meant for escape. She held no relic, no holy book, only a shallow copper dish cradled in both hands. Inside it shimmered a thick, violet liquid, the color of bruised twilight. A boy had been bitten by what no one could say. His arm was swollen, skin tight as hide. The priest had refused to anoint him. Demonic, he said, and beyond salvation. But Tova had been called in whispers. She arrived without announcement as all useful things do, like warmth or warning. Now, before the watching eyes of the living and nearly dead, she knelt beside the boy. Steam curled from the bowl in her hands, scented of crushed basil and wormwood, ash and ash bark. She dipped her fingers into the elixir, and the moment her hand touched his wound, the boy's eyes fluttered. Not healed, but present. She muttered something, neither Latin nor any tongue the priest would recognize. Her words were for the fever, for the blood. For the old gods, perhaps. For the ones who had walked these woods before walls were built. Behind her the whispers grew. Witch. Savior. Devil's bride. But she heard only the boy's breath, ragged but still rising. She wrapped his arm in linen soaked with goose fat and amber tincture, fastened it with a twig of ash wood. Then she stood, her face unreadable, and poured the remainder of the elixir onto the cobblestones. The violet soaked into the earth. Nothing happened. No lightning. No thunder. Only silence. And then a sound, the boy coughing. Not blood this time. Just breath. She left the square without a word. Back in her hut, hidden within the folds of pine and fog beyond the village, Tova sat beside a fire fueled by peat and pine cones. Around her, shelves groaned with vials and jars, elderberries and honey, desiccated mushrooms strung on thread, bones crushed into powder finer than sand. She opened her journal, bound in rough bark, the pages a patchwork of vellum and borrowed paper. There she began to write, not a spell, not a recipe, but a memory. A mark that it had worked, that this one had not died. Behind her, the flames danced. On the highest shelf sat a sealed bottle. Inside was a sliver of something pale, opalescent, like the moon captured in water. It had no name, only warnings. She'd found it years ago, after a landslide unearthed an ancient ruin in the hills. A circle of stone, bones buried in a ring. In the center, the bottle, wrapped in parchment inked with runes older than the abbey itself. She had never dared to open it. But lately the air had changed. The trees were quieter. Birds nested low. Men, once skeptical, now came in secret, bringing infants with purple lips, mothers who could no longer wake. The plague, they said, though it bore no mark they knew. One night a merchant came to her door. He bore rings of gold and a wound that stank of rot. He had heard of the boy. He begged, wept, even knelt. Tova listened. She burned sage and valerian, fed him broth with powdered horn. She held his hand when his fever peaked. She carved protective sigils on the threshold. He died the third night, calling for his daughter. And Tova, for the first time in years, wept. Not because he died, but because she had begun to believe she could stop death entirely. She buried him beside the creek, laid a branch of yew across his chest. The same day, the villagers sent her a loaf of bread and a bundle of rosemary. No note. But the meaning was clear. They feared her. They needed her. And those two things rarely ended well. That night, Tova lit every candle in her hut. She removed the sealed bottle from its perch, unwrapped the ruined parchment and set it beside her journal. The fire hissed, restless. Her hands trembled. If she opened it, she risked more than censure. She risked madness. Risked summoning something that did not understand mercy. But if it held what she suspected, a suspended tincture of mandrake and moonseed, mixed with the clear fluid of a serpent's eye, it could do more than ease pain. It could reverse it. She placed the bottle on her work table beside a flask of aqua vitae and a crushed emerald paste. Then she closed her eyes. Outside the trees sighed. And somewhere beyond them bells rang. Not church bells. Warning bells. Someone else had fallen ill. Tomorrow they would come again. With silver coins, with trembling hands. They would call her names. They would ask for salvation. And she would answer. Not with prayers, but with fire. And in the rising smoke of her hearth, shaped by breath and will and bitter herbs, the old world would stir once more. The sky bled crimson above the tower spires of Braydale. It was not the color of dusk but of omen, flaring behind clouds like smoke from an invisible pyre. Crows wheeled in the gloom, their cries lost beneath the creaking of wind-warped timbers. In the highest room of the city's old watchtower, turned now into a makeshift apothecary, the alchemist moved like a ghost. His name was Faradan. They once called him the king's firekeeper, for the remedies he devised to protect the bloodline. He had stood at the shoulder of princes, tended the wounds of crusaders returned half dead. But he had been exiled long ago, for knowing too much, for healing what was meant to be punished. Now he was here, alone, in a city on the edge of collapse. Below, the streets had turned to ash and echo. The fever, they said, was something new. It did not blotch the skin or bloat the throat. It silenced. First the voice, then the breath. It took memory, speech, song. The afflicted forgot even their names. And still, Faradan worked. His lab smelled of burnt sage and boiled pine resin. The floorboards were littered with the shattered remains of failed glassware, and every surface was stained. Crimson from tinctured beetle shells, ochre from mustard root, black from soot ground with mercury. Tonight he was testing something dangerous. He stood before a crucible lit by a hearthstone fire, feeding into it a stream of distilled rosewater laced with powdered pearl and dried eel liver, an old formula recorded in the margin of a lost Moorish manuscript. The last time he'd attempted it, the glass had cracked from within, as if the soul of the thing refused containment. This time he added his own blood. Not much. A drop. But it was enough to complete the binding. The air grew still. The fire changed color, no longer red or orange but a silvery pale. The crucible held. The liquid thickened. Behind him the door shuddered. He turned slowly. A boy stood there no older than 12. His mouth open, eyes blank. He wore a soldier's tabard, too large for him, stained with wine and mud. Faradan stepped forward. "Your name?" he asked. Silence. He tried again. "Can you speak?" The boy only looked at him. His lips moved but nothing came. Faradan inhaled, sharply. It had reached the inner walls. He beckoned the boy inside, guiding him to a wooden bench covered in sheepskin. The boy flinched at the touch, his skin ice-cold, his breath shallow. Faradan took the silver solution from the crucible, poured it into a wide-rimmed glass, and added crushed rosemary and a sliver of warmed amber. He let it rest as he fetched a strip of parchment from the desk and began to write. If this works, he wrote, the silence may lift. But as he dipped his quill again, a strange pressure tightened in his chest. Not fear. Memory. He remembered another boy. Another room. 20 years ago in the high court of Treveska. The prince, just 9, struck suddenly mute by fever. The king had wept at his bedside, and Faradan had been called in desperation. He had cured him, with a blend of honey root, fig sap and crushed onyx. But the boy had died anyway. Not from sickness, but from poison weeks later. The healer had been blamed. Banished. Too much knowledge, the bishop had said. Too little fear. Faradan looked back at the boy in the tabard. You must not die, he whispered. Not again. Not this one. He raised the silvered draught to the boy's lips. The child sipped, reluctantly like a deer tasting snow for the first time. Then he coughed. A sound. Only a sound. Not a word. Not a name. But it was a beginning. Outside, the wind howled against the tower bricks. Somewhere in the city, bells rang once, twice, and fell silent. He knew what it meant. Another death. Another window shuttered. Another family left praying to a god who no longer answered. Faradan walked to the narrow slit of a window overlooking the city. He saw torchlight moving through the alleys. The city watch. They were hunting someone. No, something. Rumors had reached the mayor. That an alchemist had returned. That he brewed forbidden things. That he made boys cough and women remember dreams they'd long buried. They would come for him soon. And this time, no prince would shield him. Faradan turned back to the fire, gathered the remaining liquid into 3 glass vials, corked them, and hid them beneath a false panel in the floor. Then he crouched beside the boy. Listen, he said, voice low. You must leave before the sun. Follow the river. Find a woman named Tova. Tell her I said, it still breathes. She will know. The boy nodded slowly. A name surfaced on his lips, unspoken. But Faradan saw it there. He had saved a word. And that was more than medicine. It was resurrection. He stood again. The crucible was still warm. He fed the fire more pine. Not because he needed the heat, but because it was cold now. Colder than death. He sat, quill in hand, and began to write again. The silver holds. The silence cracks. Let this be known. And beneath that line, in a script smaller than breath. There is more to cure than flesh. It is said that every alchemist, in the end, must face the flame. Not the flame of the forge or the crucible, but a flame that burns without heat, without smoke. The fire of reckoning. Of legacy. And in the last winter of her life, Mater Rosina felt that fire rise behind her ribs. The frost had crept deep into the mortar of the city walls. Icicles hung like broken teeth from the archways of old cathedrals, and chimneys bled smoke into a sky the color of pewter. The bells no longer rang. The streets were quieter now, emptied by sickness, fear, or surrender. But Rosina's workshop still breathed. Inside, the air was warm with cinnamon and crushed clove, the scent clinging to the damp fur of her cloak as she moved among her shelves. Her fingers, gnarled with years of mortar grinding and ink work, paused over each jar. Dried viper's tongue. Ambergris in wax-sealed tins. Fragments of emerald wrapped in silk. The tools of a life spent walking the edge between knowledge and exile. But today she wasn't mixing remedies. Today she was choosing what to burn. A scroll of vellum lay on the table before her, dense with glyphs, diagrams, and notations in 3 languages. The last of her great work, a formula that whispered of balance, not power. A draft that could steady the heart, clarify the mind, perhaps even break a fever that had outlived saints. She had never shared it. Not with kings. Not with guilds. Not even with her own apprentices. Outside, boots echoed on the flagstones. Then a knock, soft, respectful. Enter, she said, not turning. The door opened. A woman stepped in. Younger. Cloaked. Her breath clouded in the lamplight. Is it true? The woman asked. Rosina looked up. The eyes were familiar. Too familiar. I saw you last, Rosina said, with soot on your face and a bird's skull on a string around your wrist. You were 11. The woman nodded, lowering her hood. I'm called Sister Durrell now. Ah. Rosina smiled. The convent took you in then. The convent trained me. But you shaped me. Durrell stepped forward, eyes drawn to the scroll on the table. They say your notes are being sought. That the Guild of Masters is sending men to confiscate your work. That they've already arrested 6 others. Rosina did not answer. Her hand rested on the scroll. I came to save what I could, Durrell continued, if not your life, then your words. The silence between them thickened, broken only by the crackle of the small fire and the creak of wood settling under cold. Finally Rosina spoke. No formula is worth a burning, she said softly. Not if it lights a pyre beneath another girl's feet. She took the scroll, rolled it slowly, then laid it in the hearth. The fire hissed. The ink blackened. The parchment curled. Durrell looked away. That wasn't just knowledge, she said. That was hope. No, Rosina replied. It was memory. Of a world where they let women name truths and not be hanged for it. Of a language they're still trying to erase from our tongues. We are not here to give them that language. We are here to outlive them. Durrell stepped closer. Then let me learn. Let me carry what you won't write. Rosina studied her. The flames danced in the young woman's eyes. Without a word, she turned, walked to a small chest near the wall and opened it. Inside were bundles of dried herbs, wrapped in linen, each tied with red thread. She took one, elderflower and myrrh, folded around a sliver of jet, and handed it over. Do you remember the chant? Rosina asked. Durrell nodded. Say it. Durrell closed her eyes. Lux intra ossa. Vox sine forma. Flamma quae non urit. Rosina's smile deepened. You will not be safe, she said. You will not be understood. You will be called monster, heretic, whore. But you will heal them anyway. Quietly. Without altar or applause. Durrell held the bundle to her chest. I'm ready. The older woman looked to the hearth. The scroll was gone now. Only a few threads of ash swirled in the air, like the remnants of a spell never spoken. From outside came the sound of marching. Metal on stone. Rosina's time was ending. But Durrell's was beginning. She turned to the younger woman. Leave now. Through the back. Follow the river. There is a village beyond the marshes. They've lost 6 children in a month. Take nothing but the herb bundle. Speak little. Listen much. Durrell hesitated. What of you? Rosina walked to her desk and took up a quill. I have one more page to finish. After that, I will disappear. Like every woman who ever stood too close to the fire. Durrell slipped out into the cold. Rosina sat, dipped her pen in ink and wrote. I was not a sorceress. I was not a saint. I was the silence between the two. And then, without hurry, she stood, poured the last of her tinctures into the soil beneath her window, and scattered a handful of wild lavender over it. As the soldiers approached the front door, she closed her eyes, not in fear but in memory, of the first fire she ever built, of the first fever she ever broke, of the first time a child said thank you. The knock came again, harder now. Rosina did not answer. Instead she whispered a name. Not hers. But the one who would carry the work forward. And that was enough.